Good morning. We're in Tamid Perek Beis, Mishnah Aleph. Perek Aleph, we learned, Tamid Perek Aleph, we had a bit of Chazorah Masechta Midos. We learned about the three places that the Kohanim guarded the Beis HaMikdash. Masechta Midos, we learned about 24 places that were guarded. 3 places by the Kohanim, 21 by the Leviim. Masechta Tamid is concentrating on Avodas Kohanim, so therefore in the first parak we had a review of only the 3 places where the Kohanim guarded. Then we went into the first Avodah, quote unquote, that began the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, which occurred during the night. Unusual because Avodah is generally done only during the day, and this is an Avodah that began at night. And that's the avodah of Trumas Hadeshen, a Kohen who won the lottery in the Beis HaMoked, according to the Rambam and the Lishkas Hagazis. He was the lottery winner. He went up to the Mizbeach, took a shovel full of the ash off the Mizbeach, and put it into the Beis Hadeshen, which was on the eastern side of the ramp. We learned about that last week. We're going to now in Perek Beis go to the Masechta flows through the Avodah, just as Masechta Midos started with the eastern part of the Beis HaMikdash and worked to the west. It went in an orderly way. Masechta Tamid works in an orderly way. It begins with the Avodah of the Trumas Hadeshen, or the Shmira of the Kohanim of the Beis HaMikdash, and then Trumas Hadeshen. And now what happened after Trumas Hadeshen? A shovel full of a komets of ash has been removed from the Mizbeach, and now what happens? What's the next step in the Avodah? So we begin Perek Beis, and much of Perek Beis is going to deal with the Avodah of the Sidur HaMaracha, getting the wood in place on top of the Mizbeach, new wood on top of the Mizbeach, in order to be able to have the fire for the new karbonis of the day. So until now, we've been talking about the one Kohen who won the lottery, who did Trumas Hadeshen. And in the meantime, the other Kohanim were in the Beis HaMoked. Let's review that for a moment. Remember, the Beis HaMoked is on the northern wall of the Azara in your diagram 3. They opened the door in the morning. The person that won the lottery went to the Mizbeach. Then there were 2 groups of Kohanim. One went to the right, one went to the left with a torch, and they checked to make sure that all the kalim were in place. We learned about that in Perek Aleph, and that's your Tamid diagram number 2. It showed you the direction in which the 2 groups of Kohanim went. So the Azara has now been checked to make sure all the kalim are in place. The Kohen who won the lottery has gone to the Mizbeach and lifted and did the Trumas Hadeshen and put it into the Beis Hadeshen on the eastern side of the ramp. Now there are a group of Kohanim in the Beis HaMoked that are ready to come out and continue the Avodah. Who is in the Beis HaMoked? The Kohanim that came last night and slept in the Beis HaMoked to be ready for the Avodah today. Each Mishmar every 24 weeks is broken into 6 groups, and today would be Group Sunday of Mishmar Reuven. They slept there, and now they're ready to do the Avodah today. So the Mishnah begins, Perek Sheni, Ra'u Echov Sheyorad. The Kohanim, his brethren, so to speak, saw that the Kohen who did the Trumas Hadeshen, he's done. V'heim ratzu uva'u, and these other Kohanim would run out of the Beis HaMoked. Miharu v'kitshu yedeim v'ragleim min hakiyar. They would, before you do Avodah, we learned that you had to go to the kiyar to wash your hands and your feet. In our diagram number 3, the kiyar is between the Mizbeach and the Ulam on the southern side. That's the kiyar, and the bar, the hole in the ground in which they lowered the kiyar during the night so that it wouldn't be nifsal balina. The water would not become unusable because it was out all night. So this is where the Kohanim came to. Your base Hamoked is right here on the northern wall. The rest of the Kohanim, who, when they realized that the Trumas Hadeshen was completed by the winner of the lottery, they would come out, they would go to this area of the kiyar, they would wash their hands and their feet. Notlu es hamagrefos, these Kohanim, some of them would take magrefos. Magrefos are like shovels. Ves hatzinoros, pitchforks. And these shovels and pitchforks are made out of brass. And some Kohanim, some of them had the shovels, and some of them had like pitchforks, and they would go up to the top of the Mizbeach. Now there's a question about, we already mentioned, in order to do Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, because Kohanim only got there every 24 weeks. And even when they got there every 24 weeks, they only had one day for that week where they did their Avodah. So in order to make sure there were no fights, which we learned about with the Trumas Hadeshen, unfortunately there was a pushing incident where one Kohen pushed another Kohen off the rim when they were doing the races for the Trumas Hadeshen. Unfortunately, we saw mice in the Gemara where one Kohen stabbed another Kohen going up the rim. So they created the pious system, the lottery system. The Kohen who did the Trumas Hadeshen, he won through a lottery. Now the Mishnah is describing to us a bunch of Kohanim, some of them who have shovels, some of them who have pitchforks, and they go to the top of the Mizbeach. We're going to learn about what they do in a moment. But according to the Mefarshim, there is no pious, there is no lottery for this particular job. As many Kohanim as wanted to do it, obviously they would tovel in the mikveh in the morning, yet before dawn, and they now wash their hands and their feet from the kiyar, and they took those who wanted to participate in this part of the avodah did so. Some of them took shovels and some of them took pitchforks. There was no pious, there was no lottery for this particular part of the day. So they took Notlos Hamagrefos Ves Hatzinoros Olarosh HaMizbeach. They took the shovels and the pitchforks and they went to the top of the Mizbeach. Now what they're going to do here is going to be several stages. What they want to do is, what they want to accomplish is they want to clean the top of the Mizbeach from the ash and the karbonos the day before. I'm not talking now about, the Mishnah is not talking about Trumas Hadeshen. We've discussed that. That was a Kohen who won the lottery, who took a small shovel full off the Mizbeach of ash and went down the ramp and put it on in the Beis Hadeshen, the eastern side of the ramp. That was called Trumas Hadeshen. Now we're going into a different thing. Several Kohanim went to the top of the Mizbeach. On the top of the Mizbeach, they would clear some more ash. We'll see what they did with it. And there was still possibly limbs and the innards of different karbonos from the day before that have to be cleared so that new karbonos can be brought. Well, how did they clear it? And what did they do with the limbs and the innards of the animals of the day before after they took them off? We'll see what they did with them. But this is the process we're going to be learning about, preparing the top of the Mizbeach for bringing new karbonos on it today. Ha'ivorim, we are on page 10 of your Mishnayos. Ha'evarim v'hapidorim shelo nis'aklu mi ba'erev. The limbs of the karbonos and the innards of the karbonos that were brought yesterday. Let's make believe yesterday was Sunday. That were brought yesterday, Sunday. And today is Monday, we want to bring new karbonos. And some of these limbs and innards haven't been completely burned. Sonkin osam litzdode hamizbeach. they would take the pitchforks, we're not using the shovels yet, they would take the pitchforks and stick the pitchforks into these pieces of meat, limbs, whatever they were, and push them to the sides of the Mizbeach. Im ein had stodim machzikim, if the sides of the Mizbeach were not large enough because there's so many karbonos left from yesterday that haven't been totally consumed and they don't have enough room on the top of the Mizbeach, Sodin osam basovev al hakevesh. They would then put them on the ram from the sovev and above. We'll explain that in a moment. So the first thing they're doing is they're using the pitchforks to move the limbs to the sides of the Mizbeach. If you look at Talmud diagram 3, which was sent, Talmud diagram 3 is giving you a view of the Mizbeach. Remember, there are two Mizbachos. There's the Mizbeach in the Heichel, and that's back to diagram number 3. Diagram number 3, we're dealing with this Mizbeach, the outer Mizbeach that was used for animal sacrifices. We are not now dealing with the Mizbeach that's inside the Heichel. That was a very, very small Mizbeach, and that was only used for burning incense. It was not used for animal sacrifices. So we're dealing with this Mizbeach. Talmud diagram number 3, we are in Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph. This Mizbeach here, the outer Mizbeach, is the one we're dealing with, and it has a ram. The Mizbeach, the ram begins on the southern side of the Azorah and moves towards the north. This is south. This is north, this is east, and this is moving west. So you're going south to north, and you're going east to west. So on top of the Mizbeach, let's now go to Talmud diagram number 3. Here's the ram, which means this is south. As you walk up the ram, you're going north. On top of the Mizbeach, there are 3 ma'arachot. There are 3 places where wood was organized. 1, 2, 3. The 3 ma'arachos were in Talmud Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph. I apologize for that. As I mentioned, I don't know if anybody was able to hear me. My computer decided that was the appropriate time to restart. Okay, so we are in the Talmud diagram number 3. The ram, eastern side of the Beis Hamikdash. You're moving, southern side of the Beis Hamikdash. You're moving north. And there are 3 marachos on the Mizbeach. This is the large maracha. This is where animals, karbonos, would be consumed. In the middle, you see something called tapuach. It's a name for the middle of the Mizbeach. Tapuach means an apple. This is where they would shovel the ash to, and it would create a mound that would look like an apple. And we'll talk about that as we proceed in Perek Beis. Then you have on the western side of Mizbeach, Ma'areches HaKetores. This is where they took coals and brought it to the small Mizbeach in the Heichel, so that the small Mizbeach would be able to burn the incense. And then you have Mareches Eish Tamid. There was a mitzvah in the Torah that there should be a fire on the Mizbeach at all times. So this was the fire. The pasuk says in Pashas Tzav, Eish Tamid Tukat ala Mizbeach lo sif be. There should always be a fire on the Mizbeach. That's the Eish. The Mareches Eish Tamid. Mareches Ketores, Mareches Gedola. In the middle was the Tapuach. This tapuach will be the subject of discussion in this parak. When did they clean it off? How often did they clean it off? Right now we're looking at the marachos. So the Mishnah says that on this maracha gedola, which is where animal parts would be consumed, today we're starting fresh. We hypothetically call today Monday. Yesterday, all kinds of korbanos were brought, and this area may be filled with animals that have, animals meaning the limbs that have not been fully consumed. And we want to prepare the maracha for today's korbanos, which means we're going to put some new wood on here. But before we can put some new wood on the maracha gedola, we're going to first, using Kohanim, are going to use the pitchforks to take the meat, the limbs off of the maracha and put it on the sides of the mizbeach that are open. And if there wasn't enough room, they would then put it on the ramp. And where did they put it on the ramp? The Mishnah at the end says, so basovev ala kevesh. Remember, we learned in Midos, when we built the mizbeach, there's a sovev in the middle of the mizbeach. The mizbeach was built in different parts. The sovev represents the midpoint of the mizbeach for the most part. So you were allowed to put the avorim, the limbs that weren't consumed, either around the mizbeach, and if that wasn't enough room, you can put it on the ramp, but only to the height of the sovev. Here's your sovev in the picture. And where the ramp sort of meets the sovev in height, from that point upward, you can put the avorim, the limbs of the korban. You cannot put it lower than the midpoint of the mizbeach. So the midpoint is the sovev right here. And at that height on the ramp, you can also put the limbs, but not below that. Now there are two reasons given for why didn't they just take these parts of the korbanos off and bring them down, take them down the ramp, and put them on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash. The floor is also holy. We know that the Kohanim had to walk around the Beis HaMikdash barefoot because their feet had to connect to the Ritzpah of the Azorah, because the Ritzpah of the Azorah was also Kodesh. So why did they just take it down more conveniently, put it on the floor so the top of the Mizbeach would be empty, the ramp would be empty? And for that, there are two reasons. First of all, there's an issue that comes up, we've discussed this several times, of lina. When things stay overnight, and we're going to now assume that the lina, meaning it slept overnight, lun. When something is off the Mizbeach at dawn, it cannot go back on the Mizbeach. It's nisal lina. We learned about something called, we learned about some Nifsal Balina questions when we dealt with the Kiyar. The Kiyar was filled with water, and then when either dusk or dawn, either at Shkia or next morning, there was a problem. And the problem was that the water became puzzle. You couldn't use it for holy purposes anymore because it was Nifsal Balina. It spent the whole night out and nothing was done with it. And so at dawn, assuming it's dawn, the water couldn't be used. So that's what we learned about Ben Katan made a muchni, made a pulley system, and they put the kiyar into a bar of water, and therefore the kiyar was immersed, and it connected to mikveh water, and therefore it was okay. So there's this concept at any rate called lina, things that stay off the mizbeach, or things that stay disconnected from holiness overnight, can't be used later. So if, remember, Trumas Hadeshen, which started this whole thing, the Kohen who won the lottery came up the ramp, took a little ash off the ma'aracha right here, took a little ash off. He started that avoda during the night. was near dawn, but it was still nighttime. When he was done, his brethren ran out of the Beis Hamoked as today's Mishnah began. They ran up the ramp with their little shovels and their forks, and they started to clean the top of the Mizbeach. It's still nighttime. If they would take these Avarim off the Mizbeach and put them on the floor of the Azara, and then later, after dawn, want to bring them back up the Mizbeach, they wouldn't be permitted to do that because they were not on the Mizbeach, and the halacha for Karbonis is if it's not on the Mizbeach, it's Nifsal Balina. So if it was off the Mizbeach on the floor, and then suddenly dawn arrived, and now you want to put them back on the Mizbeach to be fully consumed, you couldn't do that. So that's one reason they kept it either at the top of the Mizbeach or the second higher half of the ram, because that's considered the Mizbeach. The higher part of the ram is considered Mizbeach for this purpose, and therefore it's as if these Avarim, these limbs of the animal that were brought yesterday, it's as if they are still on the Mizbeach. Obviously, if it's on the top of the Mizbeach, it's on the Mizbeach. But even on the higher half of the ramp, it's considered Mizbeach. And after they clean off the Mizbeach and prepare it for today's Karbonis, they can take those limbs and put it back on the top of the Mizbeach because there's no lina problem, because they remained either on the Mizbeach or on the higher half of the ram. The other reason that the Mefarshim give for why the limbs couldn't be put on the floor is because of halacha of Mailam Bakodesh ve'ein moridin. There's halacha that we go up in holiness, we don't go down in holiness. And this is, we know this from Hanukkah, Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, how to light Hanukkah candles. Beis Shammai says you start on the first night with 8, because we know from the beginning of Hanukkah, we know we're going to celebrate 8 miracles. So Beis Shammai says you start on the first night with 8, and the second night 7, the third night 6, until the last night of Hanukkah you light 1. Beis Hillel says no, you start the first night with 1, and you end Hanukkah with 8. And one of the reasons for Beis Hillel is Mailam Bakodesh V'lo Moridin. When we do a mitzvah, we ascend, we don't descend. So therefore, Beis Hillel says rather than doing it 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is descending order, Beis Hillel says it's a mitzvah. Mailam Bakodesh, we go up. We have great ambitions when we do a mitzvah to go up. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this is a general rule. Mailam Bakodesh V'lo Moridin. And therefore, since these limbs of the animal already reached the top of the Mizbeach yesterday, it is true that the Mizbeach needs to be cleaned today for the new Karbonis, but you can't take these limbs and simply put them off the Mizbeach completely on the floor, because that would be descending the level of Kedusha. It was on the Mizbeach, it needs to remain on the Mizbeach. So it was either put on the empty areas of the Mizbeach. If they needed overflow area, they did the top half of the ram. Okay, so that's what we just learned. Step 1 in cleaning the top of the Mizbeach. A group of Kohanim would take shovels and pitchforks. They go to the top of the Mizbeach. The group that had the pitchforks would take the limbs of the Karbonis that were brought yesterday but weren't fully consumed yet. Today, very early today, even at night, before dawn, they would take the pitchforks and take the limbs that weren't consumed and put them on the area of the top of the Mizbeach that was open, or if there was an overflow, put it on the top half of the ram. Okay. Job 1. We now have the limbs taken care of. Mishnah Beis. Heichelu malin ba'efer al gabe hatapuach. Now they're going to do the second job. The Kohanim that have the little shovels, they're going to shovel ash off the ma'aracha. We go back to the Talmud diagram number 3. This ma'aracha, the ma'aracha gedola upon which the karbonos are going to be consumed, they had to put new wood on here. So the first thing we did is we took off any limbs that weren't consumed and we put them on the Mizbeach or on the ram. The next thing we need to do is clear ash so that we can put new wood on it. So now the Kohanim with the small shovels, they took a chelu malin ba'ef al gabe tapuach. They would remove the dust, the ash that was on top of the maracha, and they would shovel it to the middle of the mizbeach called the tapuach. Okay, so you're now in Tamid Perek Beis, Mishnah Beis, and you're on page 11. Heichelu malin ba'efer al gabe hatapuach. V'tapuach hoya be'emtza hamizbeach. This tapuach was in the middle of the mizbeach. Pa'amim olav kishlosh meos kur. Sometimes the amount of ash that was in the middle of the mizbeach, called the tapuach, would be 300 kor. That's a fabulous amount of ash, and the Gemara tells us that the Gemara uses the word, this is one of the places where we have a guzma. It's an exaggeration. You couldn't get 300 kor of ash on top of the mizbeach. Chazal are just telling us that the tapuach was able to take a large amount of ash. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the number 300 is used in different places in Chazal to emphasize that they did so much, it was 300. We use the number sometimes 100. He's 100 times smarter than you. He's 100 times stronger than you. And maybe he's only 87 times stronger than you, but that's a phrase. He's 100 times stronger than you. Chazal used 300. The tapuach had so much ash that sometimes it reached 300 kor. But it's a guzma. It's just for emphasis purposes. Over Golim and on Yontif, on Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, lo hoya midashnin also. They would not remove any ash from the tapuach. We'll talk about removing ash from the tapuach in a moment. It's beautiful for the mizbeach. On Sukkot, Shavuos, Pesach, Aliyah Regel, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Jews came to Yerushalayim for Aliyah Regel. They all had their korbanos for Yontif, the korban Ola, the Olas Re'iyah, Shalmei Chagiga, all kinds of korbanos that every Jew brought, in addition to the daily korbanos, in addition to more korbanos that Jews wanted to donate. There was a fabulous amount of avoda on Yontif. And from this avoda, a tremendous amount of ash. And each day of Yontif, Pesach and Sukkot particularly, 7 days, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, and 8th day, a fabulous amount of ash would be assembled on the tapuach. And they wouldn't clean off the tapuach. We'll get to cleaning off the tapuach in a moment. They wouldn't clean off the tapuach on the Sholosh Regolim. It's a decoration. It's beautiful. Let the Jews come in on Yontif and Chol HaMoed, and let them be able to see how many korbanos Jewish people brought over Yontif. It's a beautiful thing for the Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach is being used and used to such a great degree. There's so much ash on it. Let Jews come in and see how many korbanos have been brought. But it's not because anyone was lazy on Yontif. The Mishnah says, there was never a point that we can say that Kohanim got lazy and didn't want to do the mitzvah of Hotzoas Hadeshen, and that's what we're going to speak about now, a whole separate mitzvah called Hotzoas Hadeshen. Before we get to Hotzoas Hadeshen, there's a very interesting Chassam Sofer that deals with esrog and Sukkot. A very wealthy person wanted to buy 7 esrogim for Yontif. And he would use a brand new esrog every day. The first day he would have esrog 1, the second day he would have esrog 2, the third day he would have esrog 3, and so on. You'd have a brand new esrog for every day. And he wanted to know if this was a hodor, if this was a beautification of the mitzvah. And he explained that, as we know, you hold an esrog on the first day, the second day, you make the bracha, your wife makes the bracha, whatever, and the esrog gets passed around a little. Eventually, you get these little brown marks on your esrog from the sweat of people's hands. They leave marks on the esrog. So this gvir, this usher, wanted to have a brand new esrog every day that had no finger marks on it. So he asked the Chassam Sofer whether this was a hidur, whether this was a beautification of the mitzvah. And the Chassam Sofer said it's not. The Chassam Sofer said that on the first day, you take the esrog, you make a bracha, and maybe you leave some finger marks. And then the second day, you leave finger marks. By the time the seventh day comes, the esrog is kosher, it's 100% kosher. Finger marks do not make it possible. And now it's a really beautiful esrog because the esrog has all these finger marks, which means it was used for a mitzvah. What kind of greater beauty can there be in the cheftza of a mitzvah? What kind of greater beauty can there be in the object of a mitzvah than there are signs on it that someone's really using it? It's not in your cabinet for show. Someone's using this. Now, some Sofer said that's the greatest beauty. The more finger marks and hand marks on it, it's beautiful. This is an esrog that had so many brachas made on it. And this is the idea that the Mishnah is telling us here. When Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot came, they would not touch the tapuach in the middle of the Mizbeach, even if it grew to great heights of ash, because this was a beauty for the Mizbeach. Jews came into the Beis HaMikdash and the Shalosh Regalim, and they looked at the Mizbeach and they saw, wow, how well used is this Mizbeach? How many karbonos are Jewish people bringing? And the Mishnah calls this Anoi La Mizbeach. It's a beauty for the Mizbeach. And the same thing is true. There's an old saying, my father's at Kohen Levrach used to say it. My father used the same Haggadah Shel Pesach for all the years that I can remember, and refused to allow his children to buy him a new Haggadah. And the Haggadah was wine all over it, spilled, matzah crumbs in it. We know what these used Haggadahs look like. And he said, no, this is my beautiful Haggadah. A Haggadah that has wine spilled on it, matzah crumbs in it. That means that there was many years that matzah was eaten, many years of Dalit Kaisis. What kind of greater beauty can there be to a matzah? If someone owns a matzah he's had for 30 years already, and it's a beautiful leather cover with his name embossed on it, and the pages are perfectly clean, we have to ask ourselves, is this something that he's keeping in his silver cabinet for show, or has he actually used it? So we want, as much as we appreciate the leather color and the embossed name on it, the fact that it's used is a hidur. The fact that a Yom Kippur matzah has pages that you can see there are tears on it and the paper's gone soft, it means it's a matzah that someone cried in. This is the noi of a mitzvah to show that it's been used. And this is what the Mishnah is communicating to us. Noi la mizbeach, for the ash to assemble on it, on the Shalosh Regalim. And it's not because the Kohanim got lazy, they were not lazy, and there was a mitzvah hoitzos hadeshin. What's the mitzvah hoitzos hadeshin? If you look in Parshas Tzav, Parshas Tzav, at the beginning of the Parsha, talks about the Mizbeach, the fire on the Mizbeach, and we have there the pasuk of Trumas Hadeshin. And that's what we learned about in the first parak. A Kohen won the lottery. He took a little shovel off of ash off the Ma'aracha, and he put it into the Beis Hadeshin on the eastern side of the Mizbeach. That's called Trumas Hadeshin. And that was done according to everyone, every day. Day meaning 24 hours. But it doesn't mean that it was done during daytime. We know Trumas Hadeshin was done before dawn. And Yom Kippur at night, it was done at midnight. So as we mentioned, it's an unusual type of avoda. You were able to do it during the night hours. That's Trumas Hadeshin. There is a separate mitzvah in Parshas Tzav called Hotzoas Hadeshen, taking out the Deshen. Mitzvah 1, Trumas Hadeshen. Every day, a little ash, and that little ash is put on the eastern side of the Mizbeach. Hotzoas Hadeshen. Hotzoas Hadeshen, according to most Shittas, is when the tapuach, diagram 3, the tapuach got too high, so they would come and clean the tapuach. Kohanim would come and clean the tapuach, and we're going to learn later in the Masechta how they would clean it. That deshen, that ash would be completely removed, would be taken down the ramp, completely removed from the Beis HaMikdash, completely removed from the Har HaBayis, completely removed from the city of Yerushalayim, and would be put in a place called a Mokum Tohar. Outside the city of Yerushalayim, there was a designated place, a Mokum Tomei. For example, a house that became a house that had a tzaras. They had, at certain point, they had to remove those stones. The stones that had the tzaras were Tomei, and there was a place outside the city of Yerushalayim that was the Mokum Tomei, and that's where such stones went. The ash that was cleaned off from the tapuach went to a different place outside Yerushalayim, was called a Mokum Tohar, a pure and holy place. We have 2 mitzvahs. Trumas Hadeshen, every day by the Kohen who won the lottery, and he put the ash next to the Mizbeach, eastern side of the ramp. Every day, ash remains in the Beis HaMikdash, put on the eastern side of the ramp. There was a Beis Hadeshen there, we mentioned last week. According to Rashi, it's one of the miracles that occurred, that the ash was absorbed into the ground. Trumas Hadeshen. Hotzoas Hadeshen was removing the tapuach. When the tapuach in the middle of the Mizbeach got too big, there was a process using a Pesach tear, which the Mishnah will talk about later. You removed all the ash, you took it out of the Beis HaMikdash, out of the Har HaBayis, out of Yerushalayim to a Mokum Tohar. That is Rashi Shita and the Shita of most Rishonim, that Hotzoas Hadeshen, removing the ash from the tapuach, was every so often as was necessary because the tapuach got too big. The Rambam Shita and the Ravad Shita is that Hotzoas Hadeshen, cleaning off the tapuach, occurred every day, the same way that Trumas Hadeshen occurred every day. Rashi, Trumas Hadeshen, the little shovel off the Mizbeach by the Kohen who won the lottery, put on the eastern side of the ramp in the Beis Hadeshen every day. Hotzoas Hadeshen, to clean off the tapuach only when necessary, out Beis HaMikdash, out Har HaBayis, out of Yerushalayim for Mokum Tohar. 2 different mitzvahs, Trumas Hadeshen, Hotzoas Hadeshen, Rashi. Rambam Ravad, Trumas Hadeshen, same thing. Kohen wins a lottery, takes a shovelful off the Maracha, puts the ash in the Beis Hadeshen, eastern side of the ramp. Hotzoas Hadeshen, Ravad Rambam. Every single day the tapuach is cleaned. A little ash would remain in the center, but the tapuach is cleaned every day. Like Rashi now, out of the Beis HaMikdash, out of the Har HaBayis, out of the city of Yerushalayim, to a Mokum Tohar, 2 separate mitzvahs. Trumas Hadeshen, Rashi, every day. Hotzoas Hadeshen, from the tapuach only as necessary. Rambam Ravad, Trumas Hadeshen every day, and Hotzoas Hadeshen every day. And those are the 2 shittas about Trumas Hadeshen and Hotzoas Hadeshen. We'll learn quickly Mishnah Gimel. We're going to come back to explain Mishnah Gimel. There's a beautiful concept in Mishnah Gimel about Eretz Yisrael. Heichelu malin bagizrin. Gizrin are these pieces of wood that have been cut, they've been inspected, and they're going to be brought up to the Mizbeach for the Maracha, the fresh wood. Heichelu malin bagizrin. They would begin bringing up these pieces of wood. We're now in Tamid Perek Beis, Mishnah Gimel, page 12. And they would bring up this wood, Lasader Eisha Marocha, to begin to order the new wood for the fire of the Marocha. Excuse me, so the Mishnah asks, is it then that you can use any type of wood for the Marocha? Again, we'll go more into this tomorrow. We learned about this in Masechta Midos. There was a special room in the Beis Hamikdash where the wood was first examined to make sure that there are no worms in the wood, and the wood had to be appropriately cut into shape. We'll take a look at that Lineda tomorrow. But the Mishnah right now asks, was any wood, pine tree wood, oak tree wood, orange tree wood, any wood was kosher to go on the Mizbeach? The Mishnah says, hen, yes, any kind of wood from a tree can be put on the Mizbeach. All wood from any tree is kosher for the Marocha on the Mizbeach, chutz mishel zayis v'shel gefen, except they did not use the wood that came from an olive tree or the wood that came from a vine, a grapevine. Why? One of the reasons the Gemara tells us is mipnei yeshuva shel Eretz Yisrael, because Eretz Yisrael, one of the great produces of Eretz Yisrael, one of the great products of Eretz Yisrael, two of the great products are olives and grapes. And mipnei yeshuva shel Eretz Yisrael, not to undercut Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. They didn't want people cutting down grapevines or wood from olive trees to use on the Mizbeach, because they needed it for Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. They needed grapes, they needed olives to sell olives to make olive oil, grapes to sell grapes to make wine, Eretz Yisrael's famous wine. So of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, they did not use olive wood or grapevine wood, which is an amazing concept. We're talking about taking wood and we want to use it on the Mizbeach to bring korbanos. Now, what greater thing can there be? We say that the world exists on three things. Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. Al shlosh dvarim ha'olam omed. Al Torah, Al Avoda, Al Gemilas Hasodim. The three pillars of the world are learning Torah, Avoda, which if you take a look in the Mefarshim Pirkei Avos, Avoda meant Avoda Beis Hamikdash, the korbanos. And today, davening takes the place of korbanos, but Meher Yameinu will have our korbanos back. But avoda in the Mishnah means the avoda the korbanos and gemilas hasodim. It's one of the three pillars of the world. One of the three pillars of the world is bring korbanos. That's pretty important. Yet, mipnei yeshuva shel Eretz Yisrael, because to keep the settlement of Eretz Yisrael alive, well, healthy, to keep Parnasa going. So there's grapes and there's to sell, and there's wine to sell, and there's olives to sell, and there's olives to make olive oil for use, for export, etc. For the Yishuv of Eretz Yisrael. We're not going to use this kind of wood in the Avoda in the Beis Hamikdash. So that gives you an idea of, even though Avoda is one of the three pillars upon which the world stands, Chazal decided not to use wood from an olive tree, not to use wood from a grapevine, and let's rather use some other wood rather than going to the Zayas and the Geffen. Avol be'elu regilin, the Mishnah says, even though all wood is kosher, but we did not use Zayas and Geffen, what kind of wood was customary to use in the Beis Hamikdash? The murbiya shel te'ena, v'shel egos, v'shel eitz shemen. They used wood that came from a te'ena, figs, a certain kind of nut, and a certain kind of tree that was called eitz shemen, an oil tree. There's some kind of tree that gave off a sap. There are different mefarshim exactly what kind of tree this is. And we have the obvious question: if we don't take bark off, we don't cut down olive trees, we don't cut down grapevines because of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, and why are we using te'ena? Why are we using figs, the wood of a fig tree, to use on the Mizbeach. That's also part of the Shivas Aminim for Eretz Yisrael. And the Mefarshim say because the major produce for Parnasa in Eretz Yisrael and for consumption in Eretz Yisrael was the olive and the olive oil, the grape and the wine, and that's what they stood away from and did not use the wood on the Marocha in the Beis HaMikdash. We'll stop here. We're going to go back to learn Mishnah Gimel more be'in tomorrow, exactly what there's a halacha here, Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, the two pieces of wood they brought to the Mizbeach. We'll learn some halachas about that. We'll go back to Masechta Midos to learn about the inspection of the wood, Bli Neder, tomorrow.